I first became involved with the Fifth Step through, I'm an associate artist here at National Theatre Scotland, and that means that I'm part of all of the reading groups that new scripts come through. So this script from David was a commission. The NTS were looking for an idea from David, and he came with this sort of what's called a pitch document, which is just basically the ideas of what's going to happen in the show without any of the script being there yet. And so we read that as part of the literary meeting group. And then a first draft of the script came through probably about, I guess, like 20 months ago. It would have been January of 2023 that I first read the script, which is actually quite a short time for something to go from first draft to performance. But that has been sort of characteristic of this whole project brilliantly. And when I first read that script, that first draft, I was just like, this is really exciting. I haven't felt that way about a new script for a long time. You know, that's a rough first stab from the writer, but I thought this is going to be really special. I was quite keen to get my hands on it as a director because there was no guarantee at that point who would be directing it or whatever, but I was like, no, I want a shot at this. And yeah, over time, as I say, as part of that team, I was reading and feeding back notes in a way that I would do with any script. I would read it, I'd look at where the strengths and maybe some of the weaknesses were, where things were unclear, or where we wanted more of something, perhaps like more character development, to understand what the themes of the piece were, to understand where the writer wanted to take the script, because sometimes I think it can be hard for a writer to know exactly what direction to take things, and so feedback was given. And then once I had been brought on board as the director, it became much more about my response to the themes that were there and how I wanted to kind of bring them to life. You know, I think when we went into rehearsals, it was like the 11th draft or something, although it was called rehearsal draft 2. So we'd gone past draft 10, 11, and then we just went into rehearsal draft. But it still changed there. You know, I think that's the thing with new plays. They will change so often because you just find that once an actor starts speaking the lines, it can feel, you know, they have a good sense, actors have a really good instinct of how lines work or how a back and forth might work. And with the actors on this project, particularly with Jack, who's playing Luca, he was involved for a very long time too, so he really understood the character or his take on the character. So things would change throughout rehearsals, and that's, I think, really exciting because it feels like a living thing that you're working with in the room. Personally, I try and approach every text as if it's a new text, and every new text as if it's a classic, because the two things have, you know, are comparable in lots of ways. You know, I think often a director comes to a new work and the idea is that you're serving the original intentions of the play, whereas when you go to a classic, you're doing your interpretation. Now, I think both things can be true. I think you know, some of the decisions that I made directorially on this project were about my interpretation of the script or the situation. And I think that, for me as a director, adds an exciting layer to it. I'm still serving the writer's intentions, but I think David as a playwright is really excited by a director taking something and running with it. So I was able to do that a bit with it. With this, on the page, it's just two guys sitting at a table. What we did with the design is we changed that a bit, and so they're in different rooms and getting from one space to the other. That was probably the most complex thing, was like how we rehearsed that sort of extra layer. And because it's a comedy, like, you know, I think people probably imagine that in a comedy, in a rehearsal room for I mean, it's a dark comedy, but it is, you know, it is funny. People probably imagine you're just laughing all the time, but it's you really have to like get the timings of things right, and it can actually be quite painful at times, the intricacy of the maths of like, well, if you say that line like that and then he takes a beat, that'll be funnier than if you just come straight in, and you kind of try it so many different ways and you go, no, is that funnier than that version? No, I think if you land on that word, that's fun. So all of this sort of stuff, which, you know, I think sometimes people think there's a sort of great mystery to rehearsals, but really, as long as the actors are on top of their lines, that was the thing with this process, was like they just needed to learn their lines and then come in and rehearse it. So I didn't have any sort of, what's the word, like there's no kind of great secrets to my process. Again, I'd love to say that there were. I'd love to say that I would reinvented the wheel in terms of the way I rehearse, but it's very much just about getting it up on its feet and finding the most interesting and clearest way to do it. But that's the thing about this play, is there's sort of various moments where you're not sure who's telling the truth, or so we had to talk about that, about just having a shared understanding of what's real and what's not, and what's true and what's not. Yeah, I think the most important thing is backstory that doesn't change the action of the play, as long as it supports what the characters are doing, and what the actors are doing with the characters. So that's a rehearsal technique, I suppose, I have, is like filling in character biography. And for me, that's the most important thing. We talked a lot about the timeline between the scenes, how many days had passed between each scene, because it's a series of 6 scenes that aren't necessarily, consecutive days or whatever. So that's something, again, as a technique, a lot of directors would maybe write a timeline for the whole play, and I think that's useful, just to know like what has passed between, whether they've not spoken to each other for a while or whether other things have gone on in their lives that influences how they come into the scene. So that sort of stuff. But it's interesting working with actors like Sean and Jack. They kind of do that automatically, so it takes the pressure off me to kind of impose that on them. They're just doing that work off their own backs, really. Yeah, I see myself as a director as the audience, the eyes of the audience. So I'm just watching it from their point of view, going, it's not quite clear to me what story we're telling here, and guiding it towards a kind of clearer telling of that story. So that's really my process. We talked a lot about the characters' backgrounds, because there's not a huge amount revealed about the characters in the play, and I think for the actors it was important to know who these people were and how they'd got into the places that they'd got to. So that was interesting. That kind of, I'm always interested in kind of filling out the world building, I suppose you call it. So that's part of what I do. But yeah, basically then just get up and do it again and again until it's really, really good. So I think the team is really important for me. The whole thing is about collaboration, and I'm very much of the opinion that the best thing to do as a director is surround yourself with people who have better ideas than you, and then just pinch them. So I worked with mostly with people that I had worked with before. Mila Clark, who's designed the show, her and I have worked together for a long time, and she was really top of my list in terms of collaborators, because we've just got a shorthand, and that's really important. As I said, this was quite a quick process, so you need someone that is gonna, you're gonna respond to one another's ideas. If you've worked with them before, you know that their work and your work together. Jenny, who's the movement director on this, we haven't actually worked together before, but I've known her work for a long time, and we've known each other for a long time, so we knew that we would have a connection. And Lizzie, the lighting designer, again, we've collaborated lots of times. Mark Melville, the composer, we were new to each other, but again, it's just about asking people and going, do you think this will be a good combination? People who knew my work, people who knew Mark. And really, I would, I'd love to take credit for everything, but it really was just a beautiful collaboration. And what I do take credit for is putting together that team, and it was a beautiful team to work with. And that's the really important thing, I think, is working with people who you trust and whose taste you trust and who will, elevate your ideas. For me, sometimes I'm like, I think it should be something like this, and you need someone to kind of take your idea and go, oh yeah, I think I know what I can make that into, and then put something amazing on stage. And yeah, like, it was really kind of an elite team, this team, which is that's what you want to put together, a kind of A team, essentially. So this play was written specifically with Jack Lowden in mind. So Jack had been having conversations with National Theatre Scotland for a while about wanting to do something. He wanted to work with David. David wanted to work with him. So they were sort of brought together. So Jack was always going to be playing Luca. And then we had quite a long process finding the other actor, because, you know, it's really important with a two-hander that you get that chemistry right, that the actor isn't only right for the part, but is also responding well to the other actor that they're going to be working with, and responding, you know, to the sort of notes and thoughts that I have. So we really, you know, we took a long time over that process. We were thorough with looking for people. And Sean Gilder, who's ended up playing James, him and Jack have worked together several times. They're good friends. And so it was really about seeing that chemistry. We had a meeting where Jack read with Sean, and I'd never met Sean before. And originally we thought that this would be a two Scottish actors, but actually there was something about what Sean brought, and there was this interesting dynamic between Jack as a young Scottish guy and Sean as this sort of, as an older English fella, that kind of, yeah, brought a different layer to it. And he's just, you know, they're both just wonderful actors, and it's just lovely to see two people who just get on really well and have this dynamic and this chemistry, because I think the play, you know, there's a lot of tension between the two characters in the play, but you need that tension to be able to be thrown away the minute that the curtain goes down, which, you know, these actors have brilliantly. So it was, in the end, quite a straightforward process to cast it. With this play, obviously, it's really rich in lots of themes about addiction, about masculinity, about faith, about relationships between fathers and sons. So all of those things really sort of sang to me from the first couple of drafts, and I was just interested in pulling those out as much as we could in our design choices, in our casting choices, and in the way that we kind of developed the script. You know, the play's about two guys in AA, so there's the theme of addiction, obviously, the theme of sobriety and what happens when you give something up that has a big part of your life, and probably a really damaging part of your life. What happens then? What happens when that's gone? I don't think it's necessarily a play about alcoholism or sobriety, but the fact that it is set or takes its starting point from AA means that there is this space where two men from different generations, from different backgrounds, that aren't related, that don't work together, have to have this connection with one another and this openness with one another that's quite challenging for both of them. And so really it's about that. One of the big themes, I think, is about male connection between men and that identity, and the things that we uncover about ourselves when we're talking to relative strangers, I suppose, in an open way. And then faith plays a big theme. One of the characters sort of discovers his faith. I think it's unusual for a character to kind of discover their faith in a play and for that to be a positive thing for them. I think that often that's seen as another way that they are, deluding themselves or whatever. But I think what's really bold about this play is that David's written a character who actually discovers hope through a new understanding of himself through faith. And I think that's really bold, actually, strange as that might sound. Yeah, just themes of like loneliness and disconnection. And I think that that's really present in the world. Like, I think that we can't ignore the fact that people don't necessarily feel as connected as maybe they would like to, or maybe they used to, much as we live in this really interconnected, constantly kind of online world. Like, people are on their own in places. And particularly, I think young men, I think we find that a lot with young men. And that's why there's the rise of things like incel culture. And the play begins with touching on that idea. And while, again, it's not something that is necessarily a strong theme through the play, we always see that this character, this young man, is on the edge. He could be tipped at any moment into just a really, really potentially dark place. And I think that's important that we talk about that. I think we know it's there, but we tend to kind of turn away from it because it's uncomfortable. Scene 4, which is this sort of big center of the play, and they have this debate about faith there, and we see this character. He says the line, "For the first time in my life, I have hope." And so I think that's really clear there. But I think that what I've always loved about this play is that it's so rich in themes and so layered. And so in every scene, they're kind of touching on every one of the themes, which feels like a cop-out answer, but it's not. I think throughout, you're going, oh, they're now it's about faith. Oh, now it's about masculinity. Oh, now it's about addiction. Oh, now it's about loneliness. And I think that's what life is like. You know, it's not one theme throughout. Every day you're dealing with like, you know, a million different thoughts and themes. So I think the play feels really real because of that. Yeah, I think what happens is like each scene kind of builds a new argument with these themes. But probably at the center of it, yeah, is this scene 4. The whole thing about this relationship for me was these were two characters that were trying to replace a figure in their lives. Like Luca, I think, needs a parent, whether that's a father or a mother. Like in the play, he's lost both his parents and he had a terrible relationship with his father, an abusive father. And so he's trying to replace that figure in his life. And so James becomes that. And James, I think, is trying to, without ever acknowledging it, has a damaged relationship with his own son and had a bad relationship with his own father and is trying to mend his relationship with his father through his son, but actually is failing at that. And so then brings Luca in as a replacement for his son in a way, even if he's not conscious of that. And I think that is, for me, that is the key thing in this play, is that these are people that they're interacting as parent and child, but they're doing it all wrong. They don't know what each other needs, and actually they need to interact as two adults. To get really technical, there's an interesting psychotherapeutic term called transactional analysis, which is all about parents and children, and that you can have that relationship with anyone. It doesn't have to be your parent or your child. You interact on a certain level as parent or as child or as two adults, and Luca and James just can't get that right. At one point, James is really the petulant child who needs a parent. Sometimes Luca is this sort of free-spirited child who wants a parent to just comfort him, but they're just missing each other constantly. And I think that's the real kind of the crux of the relationship in the play. And you really see it when Luca starts to find his faith and find stuff elsewhere, that really bothers James because he doesn't have control over his child anymore. And then at the end of the play, really, you know, I think the last lines of the play are really heartbreaking because Luca just wants to be told what to do and he wants to be helped, you know, and that's always, for me, been very clear about the relationship between those two characters, is that's what they want from each other. Mila and I, when we started talking about the design, we kind of decided that we were interested in spaces that were, because these are two men that are meeting up in public, they're not in their homes, they're meeting up in public, but they're not meeting in pubs or restaurants or anywhere where alcohol is available because they're in AA. So we were like, what are the spaces where people can go and meet and have a sober conversation as men? Again, something that is unusual, particularly in Scotland. So we were like, okay, cafes. It starts in a kind of AA room. We decided we wanted a scene set in a park. We were like, what if they're in a park bench? And we just kind of wandered around, like I wandered around Glasgow and Mila was in London and wandered around London. We just looked at various places and we're like, a wee cafe like that, like, do we want to, it sort of should feel like we're looking through the window at these spots. And both of us like found lots and lots of pictures online of like the corners of cafes or like the corners of rooms, spaces that felt like they should have people in them, but were empty. And that's what we wanted it to kind of feel like, is like almost like these two guys are the only guys in the world. They're the only people there. And that the audience should, and whether or not people take this from it, but there should be a kind of uncanny feeling of like, where are all the other people? And that's a sort of deliberate decision that we made. In order to get from one space to the other, Mills designed this amazing revolve, which is just this big box that revolves around the stage, or revolves in one place around the stage. I don't know how you would describe that, but it spins around. And we go from one room to the other in a way that feels, again, like we sort of break the reality of the scenes in between the scenes, and we see the characters move in a way that they wouldn't in life, essentially. You know, they're able to go through walls, or they're able to go from an AA room to suddenly being in a cafe or whatever. And again, this was something about like just wanting to kind of slightly feel like the reality of the play is slightly fractured every now and again, to keep this sense of, I guess, surrealism or like hallucination almost. So that there's a moment in the play where the character of James is dressed as a bunny rabbit, and Luca, in the stage direction, it says Luca takes the costume off tenderly and or delicately and with some tenderness. And that there was something about that, and that was in the very first draft, and I thought there's something about the way that breaks the fourth wall almost, because one of the characters is taking off the costume of another character, but they don't acknowledge it. And so that was kind of an inspiration for how the design should work, that like we are clearly in a theatre or in a theatrical environment, but the characters use it theatrically but don't acknowledge that it's theatrical. So there's also this point where the character Luca starts to break down the walls of one of the rooms, and that was like an intervention into the script that we were like, wouldn't it be brilliant if, as the play starts to kind of fracture and the relationship fractures, the space also starts to fracture. And that's one of these examples of how you can read a script and interpret it and have ideas which aren't imposing upon the script, but are rather like bringing themes out in a way visually or physically that wouldn't be there just upon reading. Again, I don't want this to sound like a cop-out, but I would like them to have a good time. You know, and that doesn't just mean just laughing or just sitting there and going, that was fun. Like, I think anything I try to make as a director, I want the audience to have a kind of visceral, physical feeling. And I think like, hopefully this show makes you laugh, makes you gasp, makes you sort of sit forward in your seat. Like it's a thriller and it's a comedy and it's it's a bit surreal. So I would be entertained by it, I think. And so I hope that the audience will be entertained too.